Greetings, everyone, from Michigan State University, and welcome to EAB University's Fall Webinar Series, which is funded by the USDA Forest Service. My name is Robin Nussborn, and along with my EAB University colleagues, Amy Stone from The Ohio State University and Dr. Cliff Sadoff from Purdue University, we welcome you today to the presentation entitled Developing a Municipal Strategy for Dealing with EAB. Our presenter today is Josh Behounek, the coordinator of Urban Forestry Services for the Davey Resource Group, a division of the Davey Tree Expert Company. He has worked for Davey for more than 15 years and currently focuses on assisting communities, nonprofits, commercial clients, and state agencies in the eastern U.S. proactively and sustainably manage their tree and other natural resources. Josh graduated from Southern Illinois University at Carbondale with a bachelor's in forestry resource management. He is a certified arborist, municipal specialist with the tree risk assessment qualification, a graduate of the Society of Municipal Arborists Municipal Forester Institute, and has hugged dozens of national champion trees. Aww. Before we get started, please know that we welcome your comments and questions. So please feel free to type them in the chat feature, which you can find by mousing over the bottom or occasionally the top of your screen. We will be making a note of all your questions, and we'll have Josh respond to them when his presentation is finished. To keep these free webinars coming, we need your feedback. So after the webinar, I will be emailing a link to a short, voluntary, confidential survey that I hope you will take the time to fill out. If you're one of the first 10 people to fill out the survey, we will be sending you an EAB goodie bag, but we hope that you'll give us feedback either way. For those of you wanting CEUs, if you would like a certificate indicating that you participated in today's live webinar, complete the survey and send an email message to Amy Stone at stone.91@osu.edu. Certificates will be mailed to you within a week of today's program. I will also post Amy's email address on the chat feature. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing soon at www.emeraldashborer.info. You will also find the recordings for all previous EAB University webinars there. Thank you for attending today, and Josh, please unmute your microphone, share your screen with your presentation, and we'll get started.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, and can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right, well, good morning, everybody. I think it's still morning for everybody in the United States on your coast, wherever you're at. So thank you for allowing me to take up an hour of your time and talk about emerald ash borer and how municipalities can develop a strategy. You know, Robin has assured me that the EAB goodie bag does not contain actual live EAB, so hopefully that will help you manage EAB in the sense that you won't have it. I'm excited to do this presentation, mainly, you know, when I was talking to Robin ahead of time, you know, one of the reasons I'm excited for doing this is, you know, as a private consultant who covers the whole eastern half of the United States, I find myself sitting in a lot of city forestry department meeting rooms talking about emerald ash borer, and there seems to be, you know, that's the position I'm in, is talking to communities, trying to help them figure out the best and most appropriate response for them. So that's the angle that I'm going to be coming at from this presentation, is as if, you know, I'm sitting there in a meeting with you and we're talking through what emerald ash borer is. Before that, we also are going to try something what I understand is a little bit new on this university session, where we're going to try some polls. So let's see, Robin, if we can go ahead and start that off right now.
Okay, can you see the poll? Oh, wait. Can you see the poll on the screen? Okay. I'm going to give you about 20 seconds to get this done.
Basically here, I just want to know who you represent. This will help me as I'm, speaking here today. Since I can't see you, I kind of got to know who you are. All right, we're probably good, Robin.
Okay.
What do those results look like?
Can you see the screen now?
I cannot see it now.
Oh, well, I can give it to you. It says the municipality, we have 13%, county 13%, state 31%, nonprofit 6%, private 6%. I put in one called the federal, which is 6%, and other is 25%.
All right, great. So most of the people here, 94% or 90% are, managing public lands, basically. So that's great for me to know. So before we get started, I would like for everybody, all the certified arborists out there, to go ahead and stand up and raise your right hand. It's time for the ISA pledge. And here I'd just like to remind that I pledge as an ISA certified arborist to adhere to the code of ethics, comply with all accepted professional standards, deliver safe and competent services with objective and independent professional judgment, disclose potential conflict of interest, and follow all appropriate health and safety procedures to protect clients, employers, employees, and the public. All right, so the basics of EAB. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about this. The other component of this presentation that might be a little bit different than some other ones you sit on is there's probably going to be a little bit more text involved than you're not used to. And the reason is I'm imagining that most of you have heard of EAB, know about EAB a little bit, and are hoping to glean a little bit more information on how you can manage EAB. What my hope is, and what I think the need here is, that you need to be able to communicate that to somebody that has control of the budget and has control of your program in the sense of what you can and cannot do. So my hope is that you can take away from this some of those tips and tricks, and also maybe get a copy of this presentation or watch it later, and it'll have some help in there for you to guide developing an EAB plan, as well as communicating your goals for an EAB plan. One of the classic comic strips out there that we've seen several times is the idea that, this bug, this emerald ash borer, is something that primarily is moved by humans. It doesn't fly real far. And if we weren't such a global economy right now, we probably wouldn't be dealing with this, But one of interest is, it seemed like when it first started, it was really tied more to firewood. These days, the spread is happening more, in my opinion, due to tree care companies and just the overall amount and the larger infestations that have happened. And really the relaxing of quarantines. When I say that, here where I live in Missouri, we started our quarantine with the first county, and then it became 2 counties, then 3, and then all of a sudden they just said the whole state, And the other thing is, if you think about the recession that happened, we're just now getting out of that. A lot of tree care companies started going farther and farther away from their home bases to do a lot of municipal work, because those were the ones that are really still spending the money. And that was what was happening with the removals, as large company or municipalities started doing removals. So, one thing that's happened is it's not uncommon for tree care companies to go over 100 miles nowadays to get to a large municipal removal bid and a removal contract. And cities don't do a good job at communicating to host tree care companies. that happens. So an example here in Missouri is a community outside of St. Louis has EAB and is doing a large scale ash removal contract. And Columbia, Missouri is where the tree contractor is based out of. And they're bringing all that wood all the way back every single night to Columbia. And we don't have EAB yet, but you know, there's going to be a good chance that that's happening. So that's another thing that we have to keep in mind, is not only is it the campers, the homeowners moving it, but as professionals and industry, we're spreading it as much as anybody as well. The most common question I get is, what do I do and when do I do it? You know, I think that's what everybody asks. There seems to be some confusion around that. So with that, we'll try our second poll here. As a municipality, you know, what do you do and when do you do it? And I'm curious how close EAB is to you. So Robin, can you step that second poll up?
All right.
All right, are we running live now?
Yep.
All right, so the best of your knowledge, how close is EAB to you? You know, are you currently infested with it? Or is it, you know, pretty close by, maybe the neighboring city, but it's within 15 miles idea? Or is it pretty far away? You know, it's in my state or it's in my region, but it's not that close yet. Or I have no idea how far it is.
The results say that 50% say it's in their city. Within 15 miles, no one. Several counties away is 39%. And no idea is 0%. And other is 11%.
Great, thank you, Robin. So about half of you are currently dealing with it, and the other half, it's pretty far away, but that's good that you're thinking about it. I'm really glad to hear that nobody has no idea. So that means everybody knows where EAB is. That's fantastic. So Robin's Emerald Ash Borer Information website is getting the information out. Anybody that knows me or follows me on Twitter knows that one of my passions is this idea of a predictable storm. And if you follow EAB, you know, this is kind of how it works. And the interesting thing is it started in Detroit, it's moving out. It tends to just pop up. And I realize now that I put that in Utah instead of Colorado, or in Wyoming instead of Colorado, but you get the idea. The other interesting thing is that, you know, as the storm moves, there's these satellite, you know, it's almost like fire where you get these spots that pop up. But, you know, one thing I will say is it tends to move pretty slow throughout the country, I think, you know. As far as a predictable storm, we also know the predictable loss and the predictable ash mortality, or as we like to call it, the death curve. You know, we know the EAB is moving and that it's coming. And once it's there, we know what the effects are. You know, lots of research has been done in Ohio State and at Purdue with some real case study examples of frontline communities. And we know that, you know, typically you're going to be dealing with EAB for about 15 years. So once you have it, it's going to be there. The amazing thing is that this shouldn't be a new idea to us. It is. You know, I'm currently in the middle of reading Jill Jones's great book called Urban Forests. If you haven't gotten a copy of it yet, I definitely recommend it. Again, Jill Jones, that's with 2 N's, titled Urban Forests. She was selling it at the Partners Conference this last couple of weeks. And it's a history of trees and urban forests in America. And, you know, chapter 4, she talks right away about chestnut blight and how it wiped out an entire species. And it's really interesting to hear how the arborists back then are dealing with it. And then, of course, we all know about Dutch elm disease. And, you know, my parents told us stories of growing up outside Chicago, these amazing tree-lined elm tree streets. And now we are dealing with EAB. You know, I think the most amazing thing to me as I read this book and I think about our profession is, you know, we're managing something that somebody else dealt with, that somebody else planted or left for us, that somebody else's legacy. You know, as 50% of you are managing public lands, that's what you're dealing with. So as you're planting and as you're managing, you're leaving your legacy. And what kind of legacy do we want to leave, and what have we inherited? And that's the position we're in. So what have we learned specifically about emerald ash borer? The biggest thing that we know now is that there is no national strategy. There is no state strategy. I mean, a lot of states have action plans, but the idea is that it's not like ALB, Asian longhorn beetle, that's happening right now, or some other invasive pests that come on our shore. The federal government, the state government is not going to come, it doesn't appear, and do any kind of wholesale bailout. We're not the auto industry. So it's something to keep in mind. Every community, you're on your own. It's up to you to budget it. You might be able to get some small grants from the states or the feds to help with a certain element of it, but it's up to you to develop your own plan. And no matter what happens, it's going to cost you money. But the biggest thing that I like to tell everybody is there is no right way to manage EAB. There really is only your way. Just because a neighbor's doing something, or because you've heard something, or somebody's advising you, it's important to understand that every community is different. Every city has its own goals and priorities. Every city has its own set of ordinances. Every state has different abilities as well. So as you are picking out and deciding and trying to weigh your EAB management strategy, keep that in the back of your mind, that just because my neighbor did it, or my boss is saying this, it's important that you develop your own plan, what's right for you. And what I'm going to do here is kind of walk through some examples of how to do that. One of the amazing things that, as I'm sitting there talking to city foresters, public works directors, parks, natural resource managers, is there still is quite a bit of confusion on emerald ash borer. It's one of those things that, as somebody that I was working in the Chicago marketplace as a climbing arborist, as a plant healthcare tech for Davey from 2002 to 2006. So I was right there when EAB was first found, and I worked on the Asian longhorn beetle and eradication project. So I spent too many weeks on my knees injecting imidacloprid into host trees to kill this bug. So for someone like me that's been around it for a long time, I'm always amazed that there's still confusion out there as to what happens. Some people still think that the state is going to make them come and do something. There's still people that think that they're going to come in and cut down every single tree and develop this buffer, or that treatments, insecticide treatments don't work, or that they're way too expensive, or that I have to remove everything, or I'll just wait until it happens and I'll just deal with it then. So the most important thing you can do when developing your strategy is get your facts straight. Find out what is going to happen, and hopefully today I'll tell you some of those facts. But clear the air. Fake news is all over the news right now, and just keep that in mind and get your facts straight. And of course, as Americans, or as our society is, we all want that silver bullet, whether it's for weight loss or for nutrition or for exercise, But I like to think of this as there is no silver bullet for emerald ash borer. It's really more of a shotgun, buckshot approach, It's a multi-pronged, it's a multi-effort, Venn diagram, if you will, on how to manage it. And, really it starts with education. You have to educate the public, your decision makers, you have to educate the private. You need to be doing surveys along with inventories. Continual surveying detection is key to understanding when you're going to have it or when you find it. And inventory assessments, there's a buzzword out there right now called data-driven decisions. How can you manage if you don't know what you have? You need to develop a management plan and be ready to act on that. And I'm going to demonstrate why that is here in a minute. You need to evaluate if you are going to treat trees. Are you going to try to save trees? Are you going to try to save all of them like Naperville, Illinois is doing, where they're injecting all of their ash trees? Or are you going to remove all of them? Or are you going to do what most communities are doing now, which is doing treatments to stage your removals for later? You're going to have to do removals. Trees are going to come down. It's no secret. Do you want to try to utilize some of that wood? You know, there are some research projects going on. There's a big movement right now to try to have a quote unquote higher purpose for your wood utilization. Is that something your community? And hopefully you're going to be thinking about replacement. What does that look like? You know, this for a lot of communities has an interesting opportunity to leave that legacy for the next generation of urban foresters. What do you want that to look like? You know, what is your replacement plan? So again, probably the most important thing you can do is understand your survey and have a detection protocol in place. And that's twofold. You know, that it's understanding when and where you are on the ash mortality curve. You know, one thing to keep in mind is that when your survey and detection happens and you find it, you're probably on that 3 to 5 year component. You know, they always say that by the time you see signs and symptoms, if you look on the right-hand side of your screen there, the ash tree signs and symptoms, by the time you start to notice, you know, that 30 to 40, 50% decline, you're probably have been infested for 3 to 5 years. It takes a while for that population to build up, you know, and it's critical and it's crucial that you're doing that. So that would be, you know, basically what most people are doing is an annual inspection of your ash trees. You know, you have them, you know where they're at, you're cruising it in the summer, and you're looking for any sorts of decline or other symptoms like epicormic branching. So let's quickly talk about the progression of it. You know, I mentioned everybody wants to know what to do and when to do it. I like to flip that and say, okay, well, when do you do it? And then what are you going to do? You know, that's the biggest thing, right? And one of the most, if you just look at a map, it's amazing. EAB, as we all know, it started in Detroit. One of the first communities outside there was infested heavily was the Chicago metro region. And, you know, some of the first communities that were found, you know, just like everything else by homeowners, were 2006. And as you watch this, 2007, it spread a little bit more. All of a sudden, it jumped out to the river. And then 2008, it gets more. Here we are, 2009, 10, you know, 2011. So, and then we'll stop this at 2012. And you can see that within 6 years, all of Chicago is completely infested, and most of the state has some sort of infestation. You'll notice that it tends to stick along the major arterial interstates as well as the major cities, but it's not uncommon for it just to pop up someplace else. You know, most of us that are, you know, in the EAB season, anytime we're taking a road trip, we're looking at the rest stops and the fast food joints, because that's where we tend to see it first. Let's take it down to a microcosm level. You know, Evanston was one of those first communities that found it in 2006. And here's, you know, they have a very active management program, a very good inventory that's up to date. You know, they're on top of their system. It's one of those communities that's completely built out, you know, so they know where everything is. And here it is on their first infestation when they found it. These are the exact trees that had it. Here's what happened the next year in 2008. That's how many trees they found it in. And then in 2009, you know, pretty much it's throughout the whole city. So the story I like to tell is EAB tends to move pretty slow between community to community or region to region. But once it's in it, it's a wholesale fire. It is everywhere and it is bad and trees are starting to die. And it becomes a real nightmare at that point. So within 3 years, you know, keeping in mind your infestation started 3 years before you found it, at least. And then by the time you're dealing with it, it's spreading. And at that mortality curve, it becomes exponential in that 4 to 6 year period there. And your trees really start to decline and die fast. And the other thing to say about this Evanston one here, and we'll talk later about it, but you know, this is just the private or the public trees. I'm sorry, it doesn't include any of the private trees. So these are just the ones that were mapped. So that is when you do it. So when do you do it? Do you wait to 15 miles? Do you wait till it's in the neighboring community? Do you wait until it's in your state? You know, that's up to you to decide, you know. And it's up to your budget, and it's up to you to decide what your risk tolerance is. You know, all of us are hopefully saving for retirement, And your investment strategy is your own personal decision. So you can wait till the end and save big at the end. You can do a little bit ahead of time, but it's up to you to decide. And it's all has to come down to your tolerance. What's your risk tolerance? What is your appetite for dealing with dead trees? If your community is going to allow you to have a bunch of standing dead trees while you're trying to manage it, then you can wait until you're currently infested to develop your management plan. If your community is not going to allow that, or you don't want to allow that, you better start sooner than later. So now that we've decided when to do it, and I don't have a magic answer for you of when to do it. I'm not going to tell you 15 miles. I'm going to tell you whenever the decision is right for you. We'll start off with another poll here. Robin, if you could kickstart this one. And before we get into what EAB management plans are, I'm just curious who has one or doesn't have one. Are we up and running, Robin?
Yep.
All right.
The little lines are going back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, the results say that 57% do have a management plan, 21% say no, and 21% say they are working on it.
Great. So that's good news. That means that 75% of you are at least have planned or are planning on it, and that's great. I can't imagine managing this problem without a plan. One of my favorite stories, or one of my favorite sayings, the public works director here in Columbia, Missouri, had told me once when I was talking to him about this. I said, "Why are you doing this? Why? You guys have a good program. You're smart. You know what you're doing. Why are you going through this exercise of developing an EAB plan?" And he said, "Josh, it's real simple. If we can't tell the public what we're doing, they're going to tell us what to do." And that just hit me so right on, that if you can't tell your community and you can't tell other departments what your plan is, then every single person is going to be trying to tell you what you should be doing, because everybody has an opinion these days, and everybody can do a web search and find an answer. My wife is a physician, and you can't imagine how many people come in and say they found something on WebMD and they have some weird third world disease that they're all dying from. So just think about that in the sense of why you need a plan. You might feel like you know what you're doing. You might feel like you're a good, competent community forester, but you need to be able to communicate that. And basically, there's really 3 types of plans. The Wisconsin DNR developed this toolkit to help develop a readiness plan, if you will. And it's great. It's on this website. It's right here. I have the link there. And it really walks you through the processes involved in developing a plan and what you should look for. That being said, most communities these days really aren't doing readiness plans anymore. That was something that really happened when it was like, oh boy, this is coming, it's gonna come. There's so many options, unknowns. What do we do to check everything out? So really these days, more communities are doing either what's called an EAB specific management plan. There's this one, and there's a copy of this up on EAB Emerald Ash Borer info that you can take a look at. And the key components, the other thing that most people are doing nowadays is they're involving EAB in part of a tree management plan. So, one of the things I like to tell people is EAB is a good reason to talk about urban forests. This is a good reason to talk about trees in general. It might be a bad thing, but it's just like how, insurance agents and stuff will talk about natural disasters in the sense it's good to have insurance, and that's why you need to have it. Emerald ash borer gets people's attention. It's a reason and a way to have a conversation. And I like to advise people, let's flip that conversation to the whole forest and not just think about just this one select ash. So more communities these days are taking the advantage of the opportunity to develop an urban forest management plan for their whole community. And then within it, they'll have a chapter or a section for emerald ash borer. And really, that's the way that I think you should be thinking about EAB, is this is just a section of your urban forest management. And that's critical because one of the lessons we learned from Dutch elm disease, if you go up to Minnesota and you talk to Gary Johnson, one of the things he'll tell you about when those communities were in the thick of managing Dutch elm disease, unfortunately, a lot of the urban forest activities on the rest of the trees halted. And therefore, whether it was replanting or training pruning or structural pruning, it really set back the urban forest program anywhere from 5 to 10 years before they could finally get back on it. And that just delayed everything. So these communities that had good proactive routine pruning programs and plantings were unfortunate that they weren't able to maintain that anymore because they had to divert all their resources to dealing with this pest. And that's what I am a fear that's going to happen with EAB right now, is whenever it happens and it strikes, it's going to consume so much of your attention and time and energy that it's going to take away from the other components of your job. And that's an unfortunate situation that is totally predictable and hopefully unavoidable. And the key to that, the key to driving that is you have to have an inventory. At the bare minimum, you want to inventory your ash trees, but hopefully, again, you can flip this and turn it into an ability to do a complete community inventory. And, at the bare minimum, you want to know what you have, where it is, how big it is, and what condition it's in. Maybe you can expand that to have a risk assessment done or understand which ones are underneath power lines or which ones are impacting the sidewalk or whatever. But really, what it all comes down to is this ability to make your informed decisions and to have that, I'll use the buzzword again, your data-driven decisions. If you don't know what you have, you don't know where it is, how can you manage it? And with that, what you can do then is hopefully flip the conversation. Instead of, a lot of people are going to view these ash trees and these standing dead ash trees as a liability. This is a threat. This is a risk to our community. Hopefully, by doing the whole urban forest plan and by looking at it as a community forest, you can flip that to these are the assets we're managing. And that's where we want to get is this assets versus liabilities balance sheet discussion, an assessment of the value of trees. Because the key is that we used to think it was all or nothing. When EAB first happened, before chemical companies could catch up, before we knew how far it was going to spread, it was, these are coming, and the only thing we can do is remove them. Now we know that, based on the death curve and our options, that it's an inverse relationship. And as the time progresses, so when you first start, you have a lot more options. As it moves along and your infestation increases, you have less and less options. Eventually around, somewhere between 8 and 10, that's you're pretty much equal there. And then finally, as you get further along the curve, you really don't have any options. So what I mean by options, I'm talking about, removals, treatment, proactive removals, proactive planting, and then, you get to reactive removals, and really that's your last solution there. So let's do some scenario-based planning here. The biggest thing that most people say is start your program when EAB is 15 miles away. I'm saying don't worry about a mileage marker. I think you should start your program whenever it's appropriate for you. Again, I'm based in Missouri. All of a sudden, EAB popped up in Kansas City. If Kansas City had waited till it's 15 miles away, they never would have started anything. They didn't start anything ahead of time. They were caught by surprise. It's in Denver now. It popped up there. EAB doesn't just move at 15 miles, So you need to be monitoring, you need to be thinking about it. But if EAB is 15 miles away and you're a community, where are you on the mortality curve? So if your neighboring community has emerald ash borer, where are you at? Are you at level 1? Do you not have it now? Probably not. You're probably already at level 3 if you think about this. So most people that are in an EAB infested area, region, are already saying it's here. We just need to find it. We just haven't found it yet, you know? So that is the reality of the situation is if it's 15 miles away, it's probably so close to you. You're probably in it. It's probably just in a community, part of your community that you just haven't found yet. So here's some real numbers. This is from a real community that you know, we worked with that's dealing with it. And this is just the ash trees. So again, this section is going to be from an EAB strategy out of a management plan, or it's going to be an EAB specific management plan. We're not going to talk about the whole numbers. We're not going to talk about species diversity or anything. We're talking about just managing ash trees and emerald ash borer. So here is what I would call a pretty typical representation of ash trees out there. You know, usually, you know, it's a heavily planted tree. In this community, it was right at about 18% of the entire urban forest. You know, so there's 4,200 total ash trees. Not uncommon for ash to be somewhere in that 15%. It's, you know, we love to plant them. They're a good tree. Most of them are in fair condition usually. You know, they're not perfect, but they're not as declining as bad as a pear. You know, so if you catch it early enough, this is probably the type of inventory that you're going to be dealing with, and you're going to have some hard decisions to make. You know, what do we do? And my favorite tool for figuring this out is the Purdue EAB cost calculator. And I know that's been demonstrated on here before. And I just want to show this is where I'm going to use, and this is what I think you should do, is when you have your numbers and you know what it is, and you know what you're dealing with, ultimately you have to decide how you're going to manage that. And you can run these different scenarios. You know, this is on version 3 now. The first couple versions needed some help, you know. And what I like about it is you put in your numbers, and then you put in your kill scenarios here, you know. So, and then you can have multiple scenarios run. So what I did was I had, you know, your reactive removals. I'm just going to wait and let them all die naturally and try to keep up with them as best I can. The other scenario I did was, what if I treated? So yellow here are ones I'm going to remove. I'm going to remove everything under 7 inches and anything in poor, critical, and dead. And then everything over 7 inches, I'm going to go ahead and treat. And then I'm also going to replant those trees. And you know, this is what you end up with. And these are those conversations that you can have, you know. Some things I will say about the cost calculator is, you know, by default, it puts it in there as a 3-year treatment. And then it also says, after the wave of EAB hits, go to a 5-year treatment. I don't personally agree with that. I think you should always be on a 2-year treatment. You know, all it takes is one EAB to come back. I've been to Detroit a lot. You know, we did a whole street tree inventory for Detroit, almost 200,000 trees. And it is crazy how ash trees will resprout. You know, after that wave of ash goes through, or EAB goes through and kills the ash, you know, in Detroit, they were really caught by surprise, didn't have a lot of money. They'd left thousands of standing dead ash trees there. And they've almost all have resprouted. And they're crazy. They look like these trees with exoskeletons now because they're 5-inch water sprouts on them. And it almost looks like you could prune them again. I never would, but it looks like you would. But all it takes is one person to come back from vacation and bring back your EAB, and you've started your whole decline again, you know. So I usually say, you know, the science is changing. Once you start treating trees, I believe you've hooked them up to life support at that point, you know. And ArborJet, you know, their triage, which is going to be, you know, is probably the strongest chemical out there. They say that it's 2 years, you know. So if you go 3 years, you're breaking the label, basically. But I do think after that infestation, you can back off to maybe a 3-year treatment. But here's what your costs look like. So if you proactively remove them, you're going to have a spike, or reactively remove them. You know, you're going to get on it, then you're going to stay, and then all of a sudden they're all going to die at once on you. And then, you know, your costs are going to even out. If you treat all your trees, you know, this is what you're going to look like. You know, you're going to have this ebb and flow. If you replace them, of course, you're going to have more costs associated with retreating or replacing. And here's what you're going to be left with at the end of the day. This is what your total diameter is going to be. You know, if you remove all your trees, obviously you're not going to have much. If you treat them all, they're going to continue to grow and they're going to continue. If you treat the best and you replace them, this is what you'll end up with. So what does that end up costing you in real dollars at the end of a 10-year program? You're looking at, you know, just around under $1 million to remove them all or treat them all. And if you want to treat and replace, you're looking at $2.4 million. The one thing I will point out in here in this treat all or this treat and replace, you know, this scenario based is assuming that you treat all of your treatable trees every other year. What most people are doing is they're splitting that in half. So they're doing half of a community one year, half of a community the next year, you know. Or if they are trying a 3-year treatment, they're doing the same. They're doing a third of the trees, you know, and trying to even out that budget cycle. That's what I would recommend. I think that's what most people would recommend. You know, if you have the equipment or you have the contract in place, it just makes implementation so much more effective. And I think it's something that people could get behind, you know, pretty easily. You know, the cost of treating is probably coming down. You know, the bigger the population level of anything, the economy of scale helps. A lot of companies or a lot of cities are doing it in-house as well. Maybe you're using, you know, if you don't want to use a restricted pesticide like triage, you can use the neem oil from Bioforest. Theirs is very effective, and that's what they use up in Canada because they have a stricter EPA than we do. So you can use that. That's what the city of St. Louis is doing. That's an injection. You could use Bourget's imidacloprid on an annual basis. You know, so the treatments are working, and you can spread those costs out however you want. You could do them in-house. You could do Milwaukee does them all in-house as well. You know, the Kansas City is doing a contractor-based. You know, another downside of this calculator is it doesn't allow for a phased-out approach as well. You know, I think that's something that communities are using more of. Like, what we're going to do is think of a 10-year program, and we're going to treat 1/10 of our cities, or we're going to remove 1/10 of our trees the first year, and then we're going to treat the rest, and then second year we'll remove the next 1/10. So you phase out your treatments, and it allows you to phase out your removals. Because, you know, the one thing you notice here on these annual removal costs is it does spike pretty bad. You know, I've talked to one community that said, yeah, we're going to wait until it's here, and then we're going to remove them all over 9 years. And I asked them, I said, well, what if EAB doesn't allow you to do that? Like, oh, well, we're going to, you know. So keep that in mind, that you might not have complete control if you wait for a reactive removal. But what does this calculator fall short of? What are we missing here? Really what we're missing is, what are the benefits of those trees? You know, I talked about the benefits and the liabilities. So another great tool that was developed by Dr. Rich Hauer up in Stevens Point is this EAB plans. And the beauty of this is it works very similar to Purdue's in the sense that you can enter in the, you know, the tree population you have. The downside is you can't enter in the specific categories by DBH. But you can enter in the average size and the program that you want to have and the maintenance costs. And then what this does is it factors in and it gives you a ratio of what the good decisions and the bad decisions are on a line-by-line goals and objective basis. And basically, you know, green is good, red is bad, yellow and orange are in the middle there. And it weighs these different scenarios for you on a total value. And what I see by value is that it's, you know, so let's remember, this is where we are, the total diameter. You know, that's the value of our trees. You know, we always talk about we should be growing canopy, and the size of trees is what is critical. So the bigger the tree, the more environmental services it's providing for us, the more energy, the more stormwater, what have you. So if we look at our population and we think about the total diameter that's there, that we're left with, you know, that's what EAB plans utilizes, is it takes and it creates these options here. So if you look at the mean total value retained right here, what it's saying is that, ideally if there's no EAB, let's get out of that fantasy world. If we use a treatment approach, our mean value is going to be just over $5 million. If we do a removal, it's going to be pretty darn low. Remove and replant, same idea, because it's going to take a long time for those trees to increase in value, the sense of the environmental services they provide. And if you look at the number of trees surviving, if you do your preemptive removal, obviously nothing. So this is another way to think about it. So, whenever we're developing EAB strategies or management plans, we're using a combination of these tools where we're thinking about, okay, what are the real costs? Factor in inflation, factor in budgets, factor in contractor or in-house costs to manage this. Project it out. I like to think of it as a 10-year program, that flies by pretty fast, but you can do a 5-year program if you want. And then you got to think about, okay, how is my canopy? What am I going to be left with? What is that going to look like? What kind of effects is that going to have on my community from a stormwater? How many more gallons of stormwater are going to be on the ground? Or how many more heating and cooling costs are there going to be from this program? So thinking about it that way as well. So just to make sure you're still awake, Robin, we have our final polling question here. And, really, when you're thinking about what you're going to do, we've talked about when it's going to happen, whenever it's right for you. Most people say within 15 miles. And now you're going through developing your plan. And you decide, are you going to do a readiness plan or a management plan? I want to know, is your community going to care? So Robin, can you start that poll for me also?
It is started.
So basically, will your community care? Are they going to care if you cut down all your ash trees, or if you save your ash trees, or have any kind of program at all? Back to that idea, are they going to tell you what to do, or are you going to tell them what to do?
Okay, the polling results say that 69% say yes, their community will care. Then there's 0 for B and C, which is no and no idea. And D is 31% say maybe.
All right. 70% say that your community is going to care, and 30% say maybe. That's interesting. It's also cool to know that nobody's community is not going to care. I think that is something that has really awakened our, this day of social media. Most of us have seen that report of the story in Australia where people started emailing the trees. We hang price tags on trees. People name trees. There's all sorts of social scientist tools out there now. I think the reality that the community cares about our urban forest and they want to know what's happening is real. And I think the importance of communicating EAB to them is real. So just quickly, some examples of how people are doing that and what I think are successful. Plover, Wisconsin, they did an inventory, and you can see they share that they have 2,200 trees and 170 of them are ash trees. And what they did is they sent this brochure mailer out in their utility bill. They have municipal owned utilities, so they included this with some information, some contact information from the village, on what EAB is, and that they had a plan and that they're going to be implementing their plan. So I think communicating that. Elgin, Illinois did a similar thing where they developed these fact sheets about emerald ash borer. There's cool ones that you like, these that are custom for each community. Elgin actually developed this educational campaign called the Fit Forest. So they did their own campaign surrounded around, it was during the Olympics. So they did this whole program on the idea that you have to manage trees. So you could do that. Another thing to keep in mind is some education that needs to happen. Here at Davey, we've done a lot of research on the biomechanics of tree failure, and it's a growing science, and we have a research day every 3 years where Bartlett and other industry companies and researchers come. And one of the things that we've learned is that when an ash tree dies from EAB, it is unsafe to climb, and they're very brittle and they fall apart quickly. So, it's something that I think you need to get the word out to people in the industry and your communities about. Another cool thing that's happening is communities are sharing the information on their tree resource and the benefits of trees. Here in Missouri, we developed this program called Show Mo Trees, where we have about 250,000 trees mapped. These are all public trees that have been done by public grant inventory projects. And it's really cool because it demonstrates, and it's a way that communities or homeowners can go on and see. So here, there's 45,000 ash trees on the public streets of Missouri that have been mapped and identified so far, providing an annual benefit of almost $3 million a year. So once EAB goes through all of Missouri, we'll have an extra 109 million gallons of stormwater to be managed. And we're going to have our energy bills are going to increase by at least $280,000. So communities can drill down. Here's the city I live in, Columbia. There's 773 trees. If you look, you can go in and you can drill down to the individual site level and see a 30-inch ash. And then you can pull up more information and see what the environmental benefits are of that tree, and you can do some Google trees. So there's a Google site view as well. Another cool tool that Mississippi developed is this idea of a EAB web-based tree calculator inventory tool. So now on this tool is pretty cool because it combines the ability to map and inventory trees, but it also takes a lot of the science out of the Purdue calculator and allows you to do a cost calculator as well. Not quite as customizable as Purdue's, but it gets you an idea, gives you a nice report out of it as well. So that's another really cool tool that's out there that anybody can use. If you're in Mississippi, you can map it better and have that. If you're not, you can still run your EAB scenarios through there. This is one of my favorite ones. It's called Be a Smart Ash. Anybody that knows me, that's particularly hits home in my lexicon. So this is something that Denver is implementing. It's an educational campaign. There's different ones out there that have been done. This is just kind of the newest and coolest one. They have a very active Twitter campaign going. The key here is education and getting the word out. So they have their right-of-way treatment plan that they're incorporating. And again, they're using GIS-based mapping of their complete inventory. They have 265,000 public trees mapped so far. And they have these different filters set up. So I expanded this section over here on the left. And there's a filter tab that they can pull up. And then they have, what I have highlighted here in these orange triangles are the trees that are being treated in 2016. And then if you wanted to, you could click on the yellow button and see the ones to be treated in 17 and then the ones to be treated in 18 as well. So they're really getting the word out and communicating what they're going to be doing and when they're going to be doing it, which is key. That's what most people want to know. So those are just some ideas that have happened. The bottom line is I think that you need to get the word out about your EAB. I don't think you need to do like focus groups and get community involvement on what they want. You're a professional, you're trained, you sat through this, you're researching information. I think it's a society, we can tell people what we're doing. Of course, as I say that, people will say, you're crazy, Josh, I have to do stuff, But what are you going to do with this information? The biggest thing that I think of is EAB is a wave. It's going to come. It's going to hit you. It's going to be all-encompassing for a while. What do you want left when you're done with that? What is your legacy going to be as a community forester, as a community coordinator, as a nonprofit that's planting? What do you have there? Other things, everybody has their own decision making. So what are your goals and how are you going to drive that? In order to make good decisions, you have to know where you're at on the death curve, and you have to be able to use as many management tools as available to you as you can. Thinking about, are there other allied initiatives I need to be thinking of, like canopy cover goals, sustainability goals, what's my public going to want, kind of weighing all of those decisions. And just, as we wrap this up here into some final words of wisdom, every stakeholder has a different goal. You know, State Urban Forestry Coordinator who's managing all of the community's urban forest is going to have a different goal with EAB than the state forester. You know, state foresters are, you know, there's more private forest land on most states than there is public forest land. And ash is a really small component of private forest land. So from a state forestry standpoint, it's not near as important as it could be a community that has 35% ash trees. One other component is that, you know, if you go to Minnesota and you talk to them, the Twin Cities, they've been talking about EAB for 10 years now, you know, at least. When it first started spreading to Chicago, it was like, oh my God, the world is ending, EAB is coming. And it hasn't really hit them yet. It's there, they're dealing with it. You know, talk to Minneapolis as they remove trees. But there can be some fatigue there, some education fatigue, you know. It's something we have to remind people about and remember that we do have a plan. Maybe it didn't come as fast as we thought it was going to. Maybe it came faster than we thought it was going to. But we have a plan, we're ready to implement it. One thing I would remind or advise is if you're developing a plan right now, like Columbia's plan, you know, it's going on 3 years old, they probably need to look at that again, see has the science changed, you know, are we ready to do that? And the key to doing that is getting the finance people involved, you know, getting your purchasing agents in. It's a predictable storm. You just don't know exactly when it's going to happen, you know. So one of the things that Des Moines did that was really cool was they had their plan out there. They were ready to go on it. They had a 10-year plan, and they had all the council people on board that when we need to do this, we need this many millions of dollars to implement it, you know. They were hoping to wait a little while, but they found it this year. But they were able to pull the trigger and get the funding and do it right away because they had them on board ahead of time. It wasn't a surprise. And that's key, you know. You don't want to have this plan and then go to implement it and not have any money ready for it or have to wait another budget year to do it. That's a really bad position to be in. Final words of wisdom here are the more tools you can manage, the less pain you can have. And everybody always says they wish they would have started sooner. You know, same as the retirement, same as everything else. The sooner, the better. EAB, it's going to happen. It's going to take a lot of money. There's industry alignment around removals and inventory tools and treatment. You know, I think that's where most people are. You got to know what you're going to manage. You have to know where it is. You know you're going to have to remove trees, and treatments do work. There's no bad science around that. And you can run scenarios to see how expensive it is. So I mentioned earlier that this is how I think about the big components of EAB. Now there's other things like ordinances, there's other things public that happen here. Really, these are the three main components. What is your what does your community want, and what is your budget? And not only do you want now, but what does the future look like? So that's all I have for.
All right. If you have questions, make sure to either put them in the Q&A pod or in the chat pod right now. I wanted to say thanks to Josh because this has been really informational and very enlightening. Even for me, who has heard a lot of this stuff, I'm always learning something new from all of our presenters, and this was good. I'm going to you know, put this on, this recorded webinar will be on the eab.info page so that folks can look at it. And if you are a municipality that's, you know, looking to enlighten the folks in your administrations and that kind of thing, this might be something that they should want to look at. So I hope that you will, you know, encourage others to see this. So we have, let's see, you got a compliment saying nice integration of the available tools, Josh. We've also, there is some of the folks that are online are the electric utility foresters. I have been watching this today. Let's see.
Yeah, utilities are something I didn't discuss, but man, they got a problem to handle.
What I think was interesting with this is, the information that you also included about making sure folks know how important trees are to their community. I think this is one of the things that they are now, communities are now looking at a little closer, because once EAB has come through, and then they start dealing with, like you say, rainwater, the spike in utility usage, because for things like air conditioning or heating and, this kind of thing, because they've lost their trees that have helped, protect their people's homes and that kind of thing. Even the aesthetics people are looking and say, oh, this is awful. I remember early on when people were starting to take down trees, people would email me just saying, I'm so upset. I just loved this tree. It was my favorite. And now it's gone. And this is awful. And I thought, it is awful. People are slowly but surely realizing that, they aren't taking advantage of trees so much anymore in their communities. So that's always a good thing. And I'm hoping to take a lot of what the information that you gave me as far as, or on this presentation about showing the importance of trees, and putting that on the website so folks can get an idea of, how to look at this a little differently. So I'm not seeing any more questions. Folks, you see Josh's contact info. So if you have any questions or maybe comments or something you want to talk about, please feel free to contact him. I'm going to be ending the meeting here. We're just about at a little over, we're just on the top of the hour here. So thank you again, Josh. Thank you everyone for participating. And I hope you learned a lot, because I know I sure did.
Yeah, thank you everybody. Hope you have a good day and hope you stayed awake.